So, if you just seen the video about the it's called Bar Drum Sheeple Story. Hello, we're in darkness. Cool lighting effects, huh? Any number files out there want to fucking see what the numbers of that mean? So, where there is light, it is taken away. 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 Where there is light, it's 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 taken away. If that wasn't 17, apologise. There was 17 clicks of the lighter. Anyway, why did that happen? Where'd the light go? Somewhere in Australia. So, you're a bit freaked out? I'm taking a lot away from you. Is Y-O-U-E-E-W-E. Is the sauce, tomato sauce. Is it barbecue sauce? Is it Worcestershire sauce? Is it teriyaki sauce? We don't know. If you lived in a multiverse where there was an infinite, as in countless number of places, and each one was its own unique point of origin or source, then how can you get to source? Hierarchy. The time has come to stop demonizing those that actually use the knowledge and information available, including some which came from organisations known for hierarchies such as academia, to criticise hierarchy. Come on. What's wrong with criticising hierarchy? What's the best social order? Some sociologists or socio-historians or whatever they're called made some kind of observation that back in the 1800s in particular and early 1900s, there was this thing called mankind. Get this, mankind. So there was no womankind. It was just mankind. And would that happen, right? They said, wouldn't you know it? Well, women never ever invented anything. There was no Hypatia. There was no, anything. God, there was no, later, after that, there was Marie Curie. There was no women inventing things, there was no women bosses. There was no Hatshepsut. There was no Queen Elizabeth I. There was no Catherine the Great. There was no anything to do with women. And the worst part is mankind was European. Mankind wasn't Chinese men. Mankind wasn't African men. Mankind wasn't anything other than Anglo-Saxon Christian men and their pagan predecessors. Mankind. You're not a man unless you're from mankind. You're not from humanity unless you're from Europe. It's really frustrating, isn't it, when you watch a video or a documentary or something like that. They're using the archaic language of the 1800s where they say humanity, or a speaker in one of those talking heads forums that they have. And usually there are a couple of white guys blathering. No, really they are. And they go, back when humanity modernized and became Neanderthals, or back, humanity nearly didn't develop, civilization couldn't have occurred. It started in Ur and Jericho, you see. And just go, well, who the fuck was Mungo Man and Mungo Lady then? Like, who were they? I mean, that's 40, 60,000 year old remains of human beings, anatomically modern human beings, in Australia, in Lake Mungo. But they weren't part of mankind. Were they? No, they weren't part of womankind. No. Mankind began in Ur and Jericho. Mankind began in Samaria. Mankind began in Heliopolis. Mankind began 6,000 years ago. 6,000 years ago? Times it by 10 bare fucking minimum. That's sort of gendered ethnocentric talk. Back in the 1970s, the socio-historians used to go, started going. Well, we've got these archaeology textbooks, and we found that ancient Egypt might be older than 6,000 years ago, so we're starting to question whether or not the Bible's telling the truth. Because back in the 1920s and that, people in the British Museum in 1800s and all that general time period went to Egypt and found mummified remains of black people that were possibly older than 6,000 years old. Maybe the Bible's fibbing. Oh, well, maybe a Danish strategy was wrong. Yeah, it could be. It was a long time ago, we know that much. And then, back then they started to let the black fellas and the women into the universities. What did your elders tell you? Is the world 6,000 years old? No. 6,000 years old, are you kidding? That's a blink of an eye. That's yesterday. What are you talking about? You mean 6,000 years is a blink of an eye? There was much, much later on. There's this story, this amazing story from Australia that people overseas would love. Someone please back this up or verify or discredit it if you need to, but This body got told a story once about these historian type characters, anthropologists, went out in Whoop Whoop somewhere, even more Whoop Whoop than here, and Whoop Whoop's Australian for a remote location. Anyway, so out in the country, out in the sticks, out in the bush, and so they went to Whoop Whoop, and they met some traditional people there, some people who were still at least partly, if not completely, practicing traditional customs, and they remembered some stories, and they told the anthropologists a story, and they referred to the stars and said, well, that once upon a time, that group of stars was chasing that group of stars, and they did this and this and that, and they described the stars, these star groupings, as though that they were people engaging in this story, and the sky was the canvas for the story that they painted this picture of events on. And it wasn't astrotheology that they were doing, they were just telling a story about the stars, and it looked as though they were describing some kind of astronomical event using people as a metaphor for different star groupings or whatever. And so apparently they went and they sort of did some stuff on a computer, and did those stars ever move there and there and there and there and do this and that? And wouldn't you know it, they found that it had 65,000 years earlier. That the story, when referred to as an astronomical event, transcoded into a metaphor of people moving, the event had happened 65,000 years in the past. So that group, and where that people get that group of stories from? Oh, their grandparents. Before that, their grandparents before that. And on back. 65,000 years. For 65,000 years. There was a group of people sitting Whoop Whoop in Australia. Okay, what's now called Australia. It wasn't called Australia back then. Whoop Whoop. 65,000 years ago, there's a group of people looking at the stars and going, whoa, that's a cool story. Oh, turn it into a cultural story, a metaphor of these different people doing these different things, and then told that story over and over again throughout the generations. So 65,000 years later, some historians came along and said, wow, would be interesting if that really was a star thing, star pattern. And wouldn't you know what it was? 65,000 years earlier, they fucking remembered. They remembered. There are these caves in Australia. There's a cave somewhere in northern Australia, okay, or some kind of rocky outcrop. It's a sacred site where this figure body has heard a story about. There was a historian went there and said, "Oh wow, what are you guys doing?" A son was blowing ochre as paint to make his handprint, and he was putting his handprint next to his dad's handprint. So that young fella, he just come of age, he was classified as an adult, and so part of acknowledge. Well, I don't know if it's a ritual or not, but it seems to be associated with that somehow. Like he was an adult, so he put his hand next to his dad's hand on the wall, dad's handprint. So he's blown ochre to demonstrate his own handprint next to what his dad did when it was his dad's turn before that. And I said, "Oh, how long's that been going for?" I said, "I don't know, they've always done that. Ever since our mob's been here, they've done that. And father, son, like that." And I went, "How long you been here for?" "I don't know. They've always been there." And then they've gone into the cave, these historians, and they've got little scraps from the wall, and they've dated them, and they've got as deep into the cave as they could go, into the rocky outcrop as they could go, and they got back an sort of average at about 30 years for a generation, right? And they got to about 100,000 years before they found that the rocks were piled up and they couldn't go any further. it might have been the case that at some point there was a rockfall that had prevented access to the older part of the site. That's how long they'd been doing it for. And in the context of that type of cultural knowledge and wisdom in Australia, missionaries came from Europe and said that the world was but 6,000 years old and descended from two people, Adam and Eve, somewhere in the Middle East probably. Absolutely fucking laughable. Completely fucking laughable. Ridiculously laughable. Completely ignorant. Completely ignorant. What an ignorant proposition. In a context like that, that is completely ignorant. 6,000 years? Bullshit. Bullshit. They found the bones of, lady and man, woman and man, Mungo, was 60,000 years old. 10 times older than that, and Mungo was alone. There are people with stories handed down that they verified were that old and older with some practices. So these days, that conversation has turned. It's gone from the 1800s of mankind only existence, only the white people of fucking Europe, and the world's 6,000 years old to, got nothing on Australia, mate. Haven't got a single fucking thing in Australia. Nothing on Australia. Australia's culture is way older than that. And there's more than one of them. Because not everywhere in Australia do they that handprint thing. Not everywhere in Australia do they tell that story with the star pattern that was referred to. Not everywhere is there a Lake Mungo. It's different everywhere you go. Okay? And they said that because they were accustomed to being on their little continent with their totalitarian worldview of Bible or death, you'll be burnt on a stake, or you'll be going to hell after you fucking die. If you don't support that proposition. And so the only way out of it they could think of, while they're still wandering around the planet stealing all these people and all their resources and carrying on like fucking pork chops, was to come up with some sonic fucking crap about fucking trees of death and life and fucking goddamn other illusory correlations astrology and fucking whatever else. And they've just gone and just assumed that symbolism is reality. And over the course of the last 80 to 100 years, they've discovered in places like Australia, it couldn't be further from the fucking truth. Symbolism's all it is. And so you go back to Kant, back to Immanuel Kant, back to the 1700s Europe, and you go, hang on a second. Those symbols and those dimensions, like the fourth dimension, for example, are just projections of the people doing the comparing of the variables. And that's it. It's not to say those variables don't exist. It's to say that the symbols used are made up. That they represent something, but that something is likely a misperception or illusion of some kind, and it's made up. It's made up. Put in the wrong box, miscategorized, misunderstood. And so the scientific revolution, or the age of so-called enlightenment associated with Kant and Descartes, is really about trying to figure out how to put things in the proper box by figuring out how things actually work so they can put it in the proper box. And we keep finding that Christianity is a load of fucking shit. It's absolute fucking crap. And we keep finding that there's these other groups that are afraid to divorce from Christianity because of what Christianity did to them. And because they didn't have other cultural knowledge to change their worldview. And so one of the things that happen, right, is that with that particular sociological history, the recent stuff, so it was in the 1960s, 1970s onwards, is that there's all these weird camps that have formed ideologically where people who haven't figured out how to put their ideas in the correct box and saw other cultures through the lens of their previous one, which, by the way, is a normal phenomena. There's an example that's a good story of this, another Australian one. Some white people came to Australia and they saw a black swan for the first time. And they went, how come your swans are black? And then some Aboriginal people, not the correct term, but closest we've got available right now, said, what do you mean? How come, what, do you have swans that are not black? And in Europe they had white swans, you see. And by sheer coincidence, there's a parallel there with skin colours, right? But the main point being made is that they were accustomed to seeing things a particular way in both cases. And when they learned about the other one, realised that there is another way of seeing things. So, did the people that learn about black swans see black swans through the eyes of people who'd only ever seen black swans? In the truest sense of the term. No, not really. Although some definitely tried. And in doing so, had to take off some of the filters that the white swan culture had taught them. And vice versa, as it turns out. When the people that were accustomed to black swans wanted to learn how to see things, see white swans through the eyes of people that had only ever seen white swans, they too lost some of their cultural filters to try and perceive it that way. And there was a whole bunch more people who went, well, okay, so there's white swans and black swans in different spots, who cares? And then some those who went, the colour of the animals reflect the colours of the people, And then others more who went, well, hang on a second, you notice how polar bears are white, but the ones that are away from their poles are not white? And you notice how people who live close to the North Pole are white, but people who are not close to the North Pole are not white usually? Has it got something to do with UV? Okay, right? There was lots of different responses to that. Okay, but people who didn't see things the way that the others intended it, and couldn't. See, here's the thing about intentions, okay? What esoteric cults like to think intentions are very different from what psychology might say. So you can pick up someone's intention by how they feel, right? Well, not really, says logic. What does psychology say then? Well, psychology says that intentions are a byproduct of beliefs or worldviews or attitudes as a response to a given set of circumstances. So a person's attitudes and beliefs can and do change, and therefore so can their intentions. Oh, scratch plan A, go for plan B then. If there's one plan at all. All right then. So maybe the way to comprehend people's intentions is to comprehend their worldviews. But people don't comprehend their own worldviews. They get accustomed to behaving a particular way. They base it on their experiences and what they've seen. And a lot of that stuff's implied and often forgotten. So they often forget, through the long course of lived experiences, what sparked them down that road in the first place, and how they truly interpreted a particular situation. And so other people might come along, and what they might do is they might start to interpret someone else's experiences through their lens. So cue the green guys with the feathered Native American chieftain hats who didn't ask permission and are not chiefs, saying that they dreamed that they were that in a past life, without talking to that tribe and seeing what their perspectives on reincarnation were and if it applied to them, because they probably don't have that ancestry, right? That's in a situation. So cue the complexities of how different worldviews affect the trajectory of different beings. And cue the crime of monoculture. Monoculture is trying to hedge pin people. It's trying to hedge pin people. People who observe and discuss what they see as the general tendencies of human behaviour, distinct from culture and how that might reflect different cultural expressions, don't actually understand those cultures at all. They just understand the tendencies of human behaviour. They're not saying that those cultures are right or wrong. They're just saying they saw this and they saw that. And a really different worldview from that can be found in some esoteric stuff. So this is where the idea of external locus of control comes in. External locus of control doesn't necessarily mean that a spirit outside of your body is controlling you, or a piece of technology. It doesn't really mean that. It's not necessarily a reflection of inner versus outer, if that makes any sense. It's more the point that where you attribute responsibility. Okay? Responsibility and control aren't really the same thing either, it turns out. It's a bit more complicated than that. So, is it possible to be trying to take responsibility of a situation but not necessarily having full control? Is it possible to have control of a situation but not necessarily take responsibility? Control and responsibility is not necessarily the same thing. If there was an argument that might get postured in a sort of Anglophone sense, might be that if there was a deity in the clouds that was watching everything that you do, okay, but not intervening in your life, then they have the capacity to control, but they don't exercise the responsibility. So then you might walk around and say, well, so what? You're the one who has to exercise responsibility anyway, whether or not you have control, so you might as well, not fucking worry about if that's true or not. And that's kind of like an agnostic who doesn't care about that. But because the assumption is that they're exercising responsibility anyway, whether or not they have control. So control and responsibility is not the same thing. Have you noticed that? Responsibility means the ability to respond. So have you no control at all, that doesn't mean you have no ability to respond. If you're tied down and hog-tied and the only thing that's free is your mouth, and someone's giving you crap, you can still call them a beep, 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 right? You're still able to respond that way. Unsurprisingly, in situations like that, they often shove things in people's mouths, right? To shut them up. A silencing strategy. Just in case they're swayed to do the right thing and not hog-tie someone, right? So, when all that stuff happens, right, okay, the ability to respond is not the same as having control, and having control is not the same as having responsibility. Does the abductor, does the good shepherd, if you will, or the slaughterhouse, do either of them exercise responsibility over their sheep? Do they make sure they get greener pastures? Do they get stuck in the sheep dip? Have the dags removed from their bum? Given vaccines so they don't get diseases? Are they given a nice warm shed to sleep in? Well, in that metaphor, we're in the era of the bad shepherd. Housing prices are through the roof. A lot of people don't have sheds. Some people think vaccines cause injuries. They might do sometimes, just not the ones they're alleging, Anyway. Is that grass nice and green? Are you led to it? Or is everyone already in the fucking slaughterhouse? So the shepherd's taken off his friendly mask and is now laughing in everyone's faces. Perhaps sitting in his BlackRock office, manipulating the stock exchange. In the Oval Office, manipulating tariffs. Or in the military-industrial complex, screwing people over through other means. Or maybe working for Starlink and SpaceX as a corporate alternative to the military means too. Are those things possible or just suspected? Do you have to believe what other people believe? If you became a different person or people, would you then believe as they do? Or would you feel so intruded upon and they likewise dislocated and out of place that there'd be an argument over world views? And that everyone just say, go home. Is that what they're dealing with in the USA? A whole bunch of worldviews that are out of place and dislocated. And a guy who doesn't know that his worldview is the one that's out of place. Hypocritically telling the Mexicans and Venezuelans to go home. Maybe, just maybe, there have been too many people who've mistaken their symbolism and their representation of ideas for the actual thing, and they, and worse still, made a type 2 generalization error where they thought that worldview applied to everywhere else. And because it doesn't, such as there's no snow in Australia to start off with, or precious little, and the vast majority of places don't even get rain that often anyway. That the jarring cognitive dissonance that produces for the people is causing them confusion. Perhaps the people of the United States of America, in some cases, have been there a long time, even when they're not from the native peoples groups. And they're sitting there and their bodies are screaming, they're American and this is America, and they're getting all the climactic information of where they live in the United States. And all the ancient stories are still there out there somewhere. But all the stories they're hearing are stuff that came from the imperial colonial era and adaptations of the cultures that arrived as migrants. And so, other forms of migrants, and they're not necessarily comprehending things the way that people who had become acclimatized to that continent, and his ancestors did so perhaps before the last ice age, like Clovis people or something like that. And their cultures grew from living in that environment, so that it's sort of adaptive, making your culture suit your environment rather than your environment suit your culture thing, is something that's very important. Empires have been known to try and make environments fit their culture, but not their cultures fit their environment. And we're sorry, everyone, but planet Earth is bigger than you. Planet Earth is bigger than you and your billions of dollars Aladdin software manipulated fake share price private equity markets and whatever the fuck else you're doing. Planet Earth is bigger than you. And just as you think you've cured one disease, planet Earth will create another to show you, humanity, that you're not the boss. And as soon as humanity figures out that they're not the boss, not male, not female, not transgender, not intersex, not neutral, not rich man, not poor man, not white man, not black man, not Asian, not anyone else, that no religion or culture or language has supremacy, that there is no boss at all, not even aliens from outer space. Then maybe, just maybe, will people get to a point where they can finally figure out how reality actually works, how nature truly operates, beyond the cultural lenses and myopia that creates, and all the acrimony, complex, cognitive dissonance and anxiety that is produced for everyone.